Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Davis, and I have the honor of serving on staff here at Wichita First Church. Wherever you're joining us from, I just want to say thanks for being here. This past Sunday, in our sermon series called Unstuck, we talked about a Christian sexual ethic. Pastor Scott showed us the difference between shame and guilt, and he taught us our true purpose for sexuality. I'm super excited for you to hear this message. Let's jump right in.
1 Thessalonians chapter 4. As for other matters, brothers and sisters, we instructed you how to live in order to please God, as in fact you are living. Now we ask you and urge you in the Lord Jesus to do this more and more. For you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of the Lord Jesus. It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lusts like the pagans who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. The Lord will punish all those who commit such sins, as we told you and warned you before. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Therefore, anyone who rejects this instruction does not reject a human being, but God, the very God who gives you his Holy Spirit. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated.
Well, good morning. So glad that you're here. We're in a series called Unstuck. And what we're doing over the next several weeks is we're talking about the common places that we get stuck in life. And today, I want to talk specifically, it's kind of a touchy subject, but I want to talk about shame, how we get stuck in shame. Specifically, the shame that we feel over our identity and our body, and how your body ties into sexuality. Now listen, I'm not talking specifics today. I'm talking about what all of that means, what's good, and here's my goal, okay? I don't know if you'll agree with my goal. If you do, that's wonderful. If you don't, I hope you will go along with me on this journey this morning. But what I'm hoping to do for all of us in the room, whatever we think about this subject, is I want to offer a Christian imagination about your body and about sexuality. Now listen, you may not agree, and you may think, I know exactly what you're going to say, and I already don't like it. That's fine. If you don't agree, here's what I hope happens. I hope you will see how, if you were to say, yeah, this would be good for everybody, this would be good for me, how that would heal. Maybe you don't agree, but you'd say, but I could see how that might heal things. So our goal with the series at large is how God's grace helps us get unstuck. And the way God does that is by giving us a bigger vision for our life. And the bigger vision that we're looking at in the whole entire series is that you and I we talked about it last week, be holy. We'd be holy. And if you were with us last week, we talked about that means that a holy person is someone who's at peace. They're full of grace. And they're not bitter. What a powerful vision for your life. I thought about that all week. I went, I would like to be full of peace, at peace with other people. I would like to be full of grace, and I'd like all bitterness rooted out. What a powerful picture of what your life could be like. And so it's a vision of our transformation. That's what we're after here. One of our values is transformation. I want to invite you, if you would, we're going to put it on the screen. Would you read this with me? It's one of our values as a church. Ready? Out loud. Ready? We believe in transformation. God's grace means you aren't stuck, and there's always more to come. Would you pause with me before we jump into this, just because of the subject matter? I'd like to pray. Could you do that with me? Lord, I pray that you would open our minds and our hearts to see what you see. You'd help us to see how good and beautiful you made us in your image, and what you intend us to be and how to treat other people. Lord, heal us in the places that we need healing. Help us to get to the other side of shame. We pray this in your name, and so may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. All God's people said, amen. Talk to you about three things this morning. Number one, the shame that you feel, and then number two, the purpose that God has, and then lastly, the hope God gives. The shame you feel, the purpose God has, the hope God gives. Now, there are some, the shame you feel, let's talk about this. There are some subjects, I fully understand this, that when you combine them with religion in some way, it's almost like a trigger. So, for instance, if we talk about money in the church, all kinds of assumptions just come flooding in there, don't they? If we talk about politics in church and faith, all kinds of assumptions just come flooding. Just triggers happen. And no different when we talk about sexuality. Again, already I think you might be assuming, based on your experience, what that will be. Now, and whatever that is for you, I don't know. It filters what you hear. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Someone sent me a video of this speaker who was at the Association of Christian Counselors in America. I don't know if you know what that is. If you're a Christian counselor, you belong to this association, and then they have a conference, and they were at a conference. And in that conference they had a slot for a comedian, some just comedic relief. I guess it's, a lot of pain being a counselor, and you need comedic relief. I don't know what's happening. So what happened, though, there was this glitch in the schedule, and instead they had to move a different speaker to the slot where there was a comedian. And so they moved this pastor by the name of John Piper, some of you probably know who that is, into that slot when a comedian was there. Now, if you've ever heard John Piper preach, he's very, very intense in an intellectual way. And he just kind of comes at it. And I've heard him speak many times. And so he just started in the way he normally does. And as he's saying all these things, people start to laugh. And he's like, that wasn't funny. I don't know what you were talking about. That wasn't funny. And then he says something else, and people start to laugh, And pretty soon he's like, well, that is not at all the response I was expecting from that statement. He was anyway trying to be funny. But people had an expectation, this is the comedian, right? And what it did is it filtered how they heard. Are you with me? That's what's going on when we talk about any subject that has any trigger point to it, and especially this. Now, it's a human thing to do that, to have these filters. So in order to help us attempt to get on the same page, let me set the expectations. I want to give you two so that we can be on the same page, and then we'll talk about what shame does to us. Number one, don't judge something until you know its purpose. Don't judge something until you know its purpose. So I could have my watch here, and it's wonderful for telling time. But if I took my watch off and I tried to take it and hammer a nail with it, it wouldn't be very good. In fact, I would then judge it and say, well, that's a really bad watch. But that's actually bad judgment because I don't understand the purpose for which it was created. Now, here's the question I'm getting at. What's the purpose of our sexuality? I want to suggest, talk about it more in just a minute, that we don't collectively know. And it's almost like we're using it like we use a watch to hammer nails. And we're very, very confused about it as a culture. C.S. Lewis had something to say. I quote C.S. Lewis all the time. I know those of you who are like, oh, look, Scott's quoting C.S. Lewis. But this is what he said. He was talking about this specific subject, and I'll put it on the screen for you. He said, now suppose you came to a country where you could fill a theater by simply bringing a covered plate onto the stage and then slowly lifting the cover so as to let everyone see just before the lights went out that it contained a mutton chop or a bit of bacon. Listen to what he says. Would you not think that in that country something had gone wrong with the appetite for food? Now, I want you to notice when people talk about human sexuality in discussions, it's rarely, if ever, about the purpose of it. It's more focused on rights and behaviors, and it honestly doesn't matter where you're coming, what angle you're coming from. It's almost the case. Either on one side, it's like you have the right to do whatever you want, and then on the other side, it's like, well, you shouldn't do this and you should do that. And rarely does the purpose get talked about. And so we're talking this morning. I want to suggest to you there's actually a divine purpose for sexuality, and if you don't have it, you can't actually judge what's going on. So, don't judge something until you know the purpose. Number two, let's make sure we understand what we're talking about when we talk about shame and guilt. Here's what guilt is. They're not the same thing. Guilt is a performance measure. So when you do something for which you are guilty, you feel dumb. So I'll give you my illustration. It's like you have a thing of cookies. Remember when you were a kid and your mom would say, those cookies are for after dinner. Don't eat the cookies, right? But what do? You go, I don't really care about dinner. I think dinner's dumb. I'm going to eat the cookies. And so what do? You go and you eat the cookies. What did you do? You did something. It's a performance measure. You did something wrong. Guilt is, I did something wrong. Shame is, again, not the same thing. Shame is an identity measure, and instead of it being I did something wrong, it's I am wrong. There's something defective with me. It's not that one of my actions wasn't correct. It's that I myself am defective. Here's what shame does to us if you're taking notes. Shame causes us to hide and cover. Shame causes us to hide and cover. Do you know the dream where you're in your underwear? Anyone else? Okay. All of us who've had that dream. What are you trying to do in that entire dream? You're like, oh my gosh, how do I get behind something? That's what makes the dream so terrible, is you can't hide and cover yourself. This is the story from the beginning. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, the story of human beginnings, this is what you find out. Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, Adam and Eve, after they ate the fruit. Then both of the eyes of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. That's more than just physical. That's emotional, spiritual. So they sewed fig leaves together and what? Made coverings. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. And then a little bit later, when God comes to Adam, he says, Adam, what's happened? Adam says, well, I was afraid. That's what shame does to us. I was afraid because I was naked. Again, that's not just physical. So I hid. And I want to suggest to you that what we feel about sexuality is more about shame than guilt. More about shame than guilt. Now, there's 3 stories we live in our culture that bring us into the experience of shame, and they only make it worse. I'll give them to you. The first story is the human experience story. Now, listen, I've been a pastor for 27 or so years, and I've had a lot of conversations with people about the things that are hurting them in their life. And I'm telling you, I don't know anything that breaks people more than sexuality. I don't. I have not heard any stories that are more painful, more shameful. No, there's something about it. Nothing breaks us more than what happens to our bodies. If you were ever violated in some way in a room like this, there's absolutely some folks who are in that category. You know that it's years, maybe decades, maybe a lifetime of trying to understand what it was that happened to you. Billie Eilish, who's a pop star at the moment, she discovered, she was exposed to, like almost everybody in our culture, exposed to pornography at a very, very young age. This is what she said about it. Put it on the screen for you. I started watching porn when I was like 11. It helped me feel cool and like I was one of the guys. Listen to what she said. This is not coming from a faith perspective. I think it really destroyed my brain, and I feel incredibly devastated that I was exposed to so much porn, she added, saying she suffered nightmares because some of the content she watched was so violent and abusive. Listen, nothing breaks us more than our experience of sexuality. We're burned by it. I put together just a little list of the ways we've been burned. Let me read it to you. We've been burned by men, burned by women, burned by abuse, burned by cheating, burned by jealousy, burned by affairs, burned by rejection, burned by pornography and addiction, burned by differing levels of desire, burned by baggage of past relationships, burned by mistrust. People feel, in the human experience story, feel exposed like we just can't cover up enough. Second story is, I'm going to call it the cultural story, and there's honestly tremendous confusion about sexuality, because here's what we say as a culture. We say, listen, it means nothing, so do anything, on the one hand, and then at the same time we say, hashtag Jeffrey Epstein, hashtag me too, hashtag consent. In other words, it's like this. I wrote it down for you. Do whatever you want, but also control your body, and don't let anyone tell you different, but don't hurt anybody, and whatever you do, be true to yourself. What is that? It's like an emotional and relational pretzel. Like, which one am I supposed to act on right now? Now, this is very, very much like ancient Rome, the Apostle Paul, when he wrote the letter to the Corinthians in ancient Turkey, he quoted a popular saying about human sexuality and the appetites in general in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13. And it was this. He said, you say this all the time, food for the stomach and stomach for food, meaning, hey, it's just an appetite like all appetites, hashtag no big deal. Are you with me? Now, I thought about it, I really did. I thought about showing you some of the frescoes and the paintings and the pottery from that time. And if you think we're a little bit nuts with sexuality, I promise you would have sent me angry emails like, how dare you show that in church? So I'm not showing you any of that, just for that very reason. But it was epidemic in ancient Roman culture. And here's what happened in ancient Roman culture is that only a few people were advantaged, and they were almost always the men. So here's how it worked. If you were a man of some status, you would have a wife, and your wife would be who you would have heirs with and would manage your household. And then you would have a mistress, and your mistress might be somebody that you either preferred physically or they were intellectually stimulating to you. And then you likely had slaves or indentured servants, and you would, or a concubine, and you would just use that person's body anytime that you felt like it. So what's the result of a culture that's like that? Okay, well, if you're a woman, that means you have absolutely no rights, not even a right to your own body. And that meant that sex abuse and trafficking was common and accepted. It's just like, that's normally what you do. Everybody knows that's what you do with your bodies. And there were the number of unwanted pregnancies was rampant. There was a practice in the culture at the time called exposure. So the man certainly couldn't be held responsible for what he did. And we can't blame the woman because she didn't want this baby. And so they would take the baby and they would just take a newborn infant and just put it out on the street. And it was called exposure. And the baby would die or be eaten by wild packs of dogs. So it's the cultural story. It's not any better, is it? Third is the religious story, and often Christians haven't talked enough about human sexuality to get to the original intent. So here's what we often do in the church is we stop at, don't do it. Like that's basically our message. Or we're too uncomfortable, so we say, hey, let's not talk about that, despite the fact that the Bible talks about it constantly. So you've got the human experience story, you've got the cultural story, and you've got the religious story. And let's just break this down. So the human experience story says that you're broken by what's happened with your body. There's tremendous shame there. The cultural story is confused. So you move from, well, be sure or get it right. It's very confusing. So there's a ton of shame there as well. And the religious story is either don't or won't talk about it. And so there's tremendous shame there. And none of those stories really, inside themselves, the way they're presented, really have any answers. Because here's the human experience story. What it says to you is, listen, the next encounter will fix it. I know maybe you had bad experiences, but just the next one, that'll fix it. It'll all work out. Culture is like more of the same, which is a confused emotional pretzel. And religion often ends up being moral policing, and none of them fully release you from shame. They only make it worse. Now, working those stories, what would it be like? Well, it would be like trying to take a Band-Aid and fix a crack in the asphalt. You and I would need a new path. Now, are you with me so far? I understand this is controversial because people disagree on the purpose of human sexuality, and that was just the introduction. So that was the longest introduction ever. You're welcome. The rest of the message is not this long. So there's the shame that we feel. What's the purpose that God has? Let's talk about that. Go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. Listen very carefully. God saw all that he had made. This is right after he's made human beings. And it was, what's the words? Can you say it out loud? Just want to make sure it's in your brain. Very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. This is the paradigmatic story of the human experience about bodies and sexuality. And God's pronouncement on both of those things is good. Very good. In fact, the Hebrew word is tov. Just turn to your neighbor and say, tov. You are very tov. You are very tov. And tov, good, in that sense, has 5 characteristics to it. It's good. It's practical and useful. So your body is practical and useful. I mean, you got up this morning, your legs worked to get you into this room, or if you're watching us online, your hand and your brain coordinated to log in online. Your body is good in the sense that it's practical and useful. Your body is desirable and beautiful. Have you ever looked at your fingers or examined your eye in the mirror and just the absolute marvel of the human body? The quality of your body is good. I mean, the fact that an organic thing can exist for, what's the actuarial table, 76, 78, 79 years, and continue to do the same things. I mean, that's some fantastic quality right there. Your body is morally good. It's a beautiful, morally good thing. And it's philosophically good. It takes you to a good end. It takes you to a good place. So let me translate this for you so that you don't miss this, because this is actually very, very important. That means that you and your body and the desires that come from your body were created by God, and they're good. So that means you can look yourself in the mirror and look yourself right in the eyes, and you can, and look at all of you that maybe you feel shamed about parts of you, and you can simply say, that's good. That's a beautiful gift. So then the text goes on, the story of Adam and Eve, and Genesis 2:25. Adam, this is before they eat of the fruit. Adam and his wife, verse 25, Adam and his wife were both naked. Again, that's not just physical. And they felt no what? So here's what that means. Christianity is positive about sexuality. Sexuality for the Christian message starts with goodness, not shame. Are you tracking with me? You could go, don't do it now, but you could go to the Song of Solomon. Read it this afternoon. Just some light afternoon reading for those of you who've never read it. You could go to the book of Hebrews, where the writer of Hebrews says, hey, let the marriage bed be pure and undefiled. You could go to where Paul tells husbands and wives, hey, don't deprive one another. The message is repeatedly over and over again. It's very, very good. And at the same time, Christianity, the Bible, does not idolize sexuality. Jesus and Paul were single. So a fulfilled life does not require sexual expression. Did you know that? I mean, in our culture, that's not the case at all. Like, if you're less than human unless you express your sexuality in some way. And I promise you, if a Christian tries to shame you about this, they're telling you more about their discomfort than they are about God's purpose. Because the purpose of the Bible from the beginning is that it's very good. So let me give you the purpose that God has. It has these elements. Sexuality is not an idol. We don't idolize it. We don't say you have to have it to be a complete person. It's good because it's a gift from God. God intended it. The context for expressing it is a man and a woman inside of a covenantal relationship. And there's not shame. There's not meant to be shame around it. So there's a lot there. That means two things at least. It means you don't have to have it. Listen, if you're single or you were married and you're not married now, or whatever your situation might be, I just want to tell you that the ultimate relationship that you can have is an unbarriered relationship with God, not with another person. And at the same time, for the expression of sexuality, it's meant to be covenantal and whole life. Now, I may get in trouble for this right here, so just stay with me, okay? I've used this illustration before, but in our culture, the way you express sexuality is you say, well, that's a part. I want the sexual side of you, but I don't want to commit. I want to commit my body to you, and I want your body, but I'm not going to give you any other parts of my life. The Christian picture is, no, I give all parts of my life to you. I commit all parts of my life to you inside of a covenant, and then as an expression of that, then we join our bodies and we're one flesh. So this is my little illustration. Again, I may get in trouble with you. I'm sorry. You can write your letters to Larry Page at firstnaz.org. I'll get them right away. But if you say it's not a big deal, why are you making this a big deal? Okay, all right, okay. You have an experience with someone and you're not committed to them and they're not committed to you. After the experience, just get up, no big deal, and go into their wallet or purse, take out their debit card, order whatever you want on Amazon. It doesn't matter at all. Get anything and everything because you just shared your body with them and they shared their body with you. So you ought to be entitled to some of their things, right? Do you see how it doesn't work? Like when you see it that way, you're like, oh, wait a second. So the early Christians, what happens, they so took to heart the goodness of sexuality, the way the Bible taught it and teaches it, is that it actually, many historians say, was one of the key linchpins that changed society. They had a tov, a good view of sexuality. And here's what it looked like in practice. Tim Keller says it this way. He says what the culture did is they were promiscuous with their bodies and stingy with their money. But what the Christians did was they were promiscuous with their money and stingy with their bodies. Boy, that's good. So they talked about Christians talked about sexuality and the purpose of it in a way that lifted women, that protected the vulnerable, cared for children, and created spaces and communities that were safe from abuse. So I'll give you an example. Say you were a woman in ancient Rome, and for no fault of your own, either the Roman Empire came and raided your village, and you were taken off as a slave and given to some Roman nobleman of some type, or in an attempt to earn money for your family, you signed yourself out for indentured servitude, which meant for a period of time. And you were someone's slave. And what that woman would experience is that man, whenever he felt like it, would just use that woman's body. And so let's say you heard that there was this message that it doesn't have to be that way, and you find this group of people who live a different way with regard to their body and human sexuality and how they treat other people, and they're attached to this person, Jesus. And so you go, and there you look across, sitting next to you is one of those rich men that you've seen in other places, not interacted with, you've seen in one of those other places, and you start to get fear. You start to go, oh my gosh, what's happening? Is he going to abuse me? And then you discover that inside of that community, the way that community treats one another and each other's bodies, that it's completely safe, and that man has no intent to harm you. That's what the Christian sexual ethic creates and is intended to create. Now, again, you may not agree with this. Would that be a reasonable goal, a reasonable purpose for human sexuality? It's covenantal, it's whole, it frees you, it's full of purpose. I mean, that seems a lot better to me, doesn't it, to you? Now, I said all that in hopes that you would actually hear what's being said by the Apostle Paul, because we all have these filters. And what Paul does is he gives us 2 points of reference for human sexuality. And here's the first one. It's in verses 1 to 3. He goes through this whole thing where he says, this is how you're to live to please God, for you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of the Lord Jesus. And he says, it is God's will that you should be sanctified. The original language reads a little differently. It says, for this is God's will, the sanctification of you. What's that word? It's the same word that was used last week. We talked about in Hebrews chapter 12 for holy, and it's a word that means that you're consecrated or you're set apart or you're set aside for a specific purpose. My daughter tried out for volleyball, and as she tried out for volleyball for a team, some of the players were set apart to play. They were set apart to be on the team. They were picked. They were chosen. If you're like me, you may have in your garage a tool that is set apart. It's do you have the junky screwdriver that you don't care if it gets, something happens to it, and then you've got the other screwdriver that maybe you have mounted with a light on it, and it's set apart as holy to the Lord. Are you any other guys with me? Like it's set up, or you got a pickleball paddle. Some of you I know are into pickleball, right? Maybe you have it in your closet with a nice little light that has a glow. I don't know. Like it's set apart to the Lord, right? Here's how it goes. Here's how sanctification goes. Jesus pays for your life with his and then sets you apart for a high purpose. That's God's will. That's God's intent for your life. God picks you and wants you. You have a high purpose. To be sanctified is a vision for your life, a vision of high purpose, full of goodness and value. That's the first part that Paul's trying. Don't miss that. So Paul then says that then you should be sanctified, that you should also avoid sexual immorality. The Greek literally says to abstain from, and I'll use the word that's in the Greek, to abstain from porneia. In other words, if you're going to live with a high purpose, that means that you'd stay away from low purpose, right? That includes what you do with your body and with other bodies. So that word porneia right there, often is translated evil. You recognize the word, don't you? You know that the root word That's the root word for a word that's very common in our culture. And Scott McKnight, a New Testament scholar, he said that when you want to know what that word means, what you can do is that's actually a double click to Leviticus 18. You can go read Leviticus 18 this afternoon. That's the definition of sexual immorality. That's what it is. All those things, all those prohibitions. And I'll sum it up for you. It's any sex outside of marriage. So any type of porneia refers to any expression other than expression with your spouse. Why? Well, when you do, you break the covenant, you fracture it in parts, you break hearts, including your own. And so Paul says, hey, what would be best is if you want to live a different kind of life, is that you would abstain from the things that would keep you from that kind of life. That you would, so it's like goes like this, right? When you want to lose weight, what do? If you're like me, you do your best to keep sugar away from you. And if your spouse brings home something with sugar in it or cookies that you love, you say, why could you betray me like this? Why do you do this to me? You try to keep them far away from you, right? You say, I'm going to keep those at the store. I do not want those things in my life. You don't do that out of shame, but out of a desire for what's good for you. So here's what I'm trying to paint the picture of. Can you see that the message of abstaining from certain things is not a message of shame? It's a message of abstaining out of a higher purpose that's rooted in what's good. And if you don't see that, what you'll end up doing is perpetuating one of those stories of shame about human sexuality. Then, here's what Paul does, is he gives us 4 ways that I'm going to call it the Christian body ethic, how we treat our bodies and other people's bodies, ennobles persons. 4 ways the Christian body ethic ennobles persons. Verse 4, he says, each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable. Here, what's the result of that? If that's just how we that's how we treat, that's what we do with bodies. That would mean that women are safe with men, that children are safe, that no one is objectified. When you come into this building or into any of our homes, you will always feel safe. Why am I saying that? Well, we are fast returning to the slave woman time. And the way we force people to not use other people's bodies, especially in the workplace, is you have to sign something, or we threaten you with firing or with legal action. And the message of Jesus and the message of Christian community is not that. We're not trying to force you to do something. We're saying, hey, if you understand the vision that God has for your body, then what happens is it comes on your heart. No one has to force you to do it. It's what you want to do. And then he says, and so not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. Again, those frescoes and paintings that you're welcome, I did not put on the screen for you. They reference the fact that it's no different than hookup culture today. What is that all about? If you don't know what hookup culture is, ask someone at lunch. You're welcome for the conversation you'll have at lunchtime today. It's about using people. I just want to suggest to you, if you want a different experience of sex, try not using people. And then he says, and in this matter, no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother. Do you remember, it's not as prevalent now, but do you remember the Me Too, hashtag Me Too? And I couldn't understand it when some Christians were like, well, that's just, why are they doing that? It's like, wait, what? Have you not read Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 6? And in this matter, no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. And our culture was recognizing the truth of 1 Thessalonians 4, 6. That shouldn't happen. That's not supposed to happen. No one should be harmed or taken advantage of sexually. It's a potent book that was a bestseller for a little while. It's not as popular now. It's called The Culture Code. And it was written by a Frenchman by the name of Clotaire Rappeal. Clotaire Rappeal was a marketer, or is a marketer, and he sold his services for lots of dollars to companies all over the world. And what he would do in his understanding of marketing is he would go into a given culture and he would do all kinds of cultural research about what something meant to that culture. So the Ford Bronco and the Jeep Wrangler, and it's a fascinating read. If you're into that kind of thing, fascinating read. But you know what he did? He did a study on sexuality in American culture. And every time he would do that, he would come up with a word or a phrase that would summarize what that culture thought from his research about that issue. And he studied American culture because people were trying to understand how to sell to American culture. And he studied American sexuality, the way we think about sexuality. And do you know the word that he found, that he came up again and again and again when he would study it? You know, the word that summarized the American understanding of human sexuality, you know what it is? Violence. In this matter, no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. We're meant to create a culture, a community of safety and delight. But how do you do that if you don't know what sex is for in the first place? And then he goes on, he says, and the Lord will punish all those who commit such sins, as we've told you and warned you before. Now, I don't have time to get into all this and dig down deep on this, but many scholars say when Paul's writing about judgment, he says it in Romans, he says, like, you receive in your body the consequences of your sin. He's saying that when we experience God's judgment, it's the natural consequences of what we do. So here's what we are. We're in a place where we're receiving in our bodies the consequences of our sin. If you've done any study at all, there are plenty of organizations now with the epidemic of pornography addiction that are not even faith-based who tell you that what that does is it literally rewires the chemicals in your brain so that it changes your whole experience of sexuality. You can't even be attracted to a real person. You're just attracted to an image on a screen or on a page, and it literally fries your brain. What's happening? You're receiving in your body the result of what you've done. If I could say something to the younger generation, I understand the rest of us in the room has experienced, like, well, this happened, that happened, and I can't go back. But man, if you were at a certain age, you could say, you know what, I'm going to keep myself for someone until I marry them, and then I'm going to give them my whole self, my money, my future, my heart, where I'm headed, and my body as a gift. Do you know what that would keep you from? You know, you would not have to endure the difficulty and pain. You would not have to endure. Like, if you're young, and you have the guts, go ask somebody what they've endured. You'll avoid it completely. Okay, so what's the hope that God gives in the middle of all this? Well, Paul later in his letter, he says in 1 Thessalonians 5, 9, and 10, he says, God didn't appoint us to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. He died for us so that whether we're awake or asleep, we may live together with him. I just want to suggest to you that we're receiving the wrath of our sexuality wrongly pursued. Anger, hatred, bitterness, disillusionment, shame. Like we've kind of done that to ourselves. Do you see that? I'm not trying to heap on anybody. I'm just saying, do you see that? But I want to tell you the good news. You're not saved by your sexuality. You're not saved by what you've done or not done. Did you know that? Like, God doesn't look at you and go, oh, you did that. I'm sorry. I can't welcome you. Now, that's not the message you get in our culture. We think you are. If you're on the left, we say, own your truth, man. Be yourself, baby. Define yourself however you want to be. And if you're on the right, we're saying, no, don't do that. There's only one kind you can be. What are we saved by? We're saved by grace. We're saved by God's grace. We're not saved by what we've been through or not been through or been able to avoid. We're saved by the loving grace of God. If you're taking notes, grace is what heals shame because it allows do-overs. It doesn't matter what you've been through. You can start over. You get a do-over. Like the grace of God's like, I forgive what you have been through. I want to heal the shame that you feel. I have something good and better for you. Maybe you've seen this picture of Vera and Mel. It went around. It was kind of famous for a little bit, for a minute. And they've been married. I don't know if they're still alive. They're 90 and 95, and they've been together for 72 years. There's a picture here of them when they got married on their wedding day as well, right there. What a picture. What a picture of what could be. If you had a sense that you could be together with somebody, and listen, I know I'm talking to people who are married. I'm not trying to exclude you if you're single, but just stay with me for a second. Like if this was the picture we had, this is the outlet. You have a lifetime of love. What a gift you give to a culture. Now, Paul says that it's God's will that you would be sanctified, and we're going to talk about this in more detail next week about what that means. But I want to suggest to you, and we talk about this in the Church of the Nazarene, that your sanctification is both a moment and a process. It's a decision that you make and a path that you walk. So you say, okay, God, I know you've forgiven me, and I know you love me, and you gave yourself for me, and when I've sinned, so forgive me. And then we say, okay, but there's also a moment that comes in a person's life when you say, God, I got all of you. I want to make sure you get all of me. And that you make that decision. You decide that's what you're going to do. You commit yourself to God. And in that moment, what God does is does something in you, puts more grace into you in a way that changes you and puts you on the path of living a sanctified and holy life. You might need to do that. You might need to go, you know what, with regard to my body, I have not lived a sanctified life, but from this moment on, I would like to. I would like a do-over. I need to start over. God, help me. And I would love it if this would be a moment that you would do that. And when we're done with the service, there'll be some folks down front. If you want someone to pray with you, they'll pray with you. If you want to just kneel at these altars right here, you can do that. We're trying to create space at the end of the service for you to actually encounter God and do the business with God that you need to do. And so I would encourage you to do that. But I don't want you to miss out on God's will for your life, which is that you live a holy life. You're part of a safe community, a place of grace and safety for people, for women, for men, for children, a place of healing and not shame. Man, I'm for that. Anybody else? Yeah, I'm for that. Would you stand with me? I want to pray for you. David's going to come and tell you a couple of next steps here in just a second. But let me, if I could pray for you. God, thank you for your word that doesn't shy away from things that make us uncomfortable. I know that a lot has been said and more has been unsaid about this entire subject. But Lord, thank you for the way you created us. Very good. I know in a room like this, there are people who've been through abuse, and Lord, I don't know how to heal that. I pray today, though, that your Holy Spirit would be near to them, loving them, assuring them that they're not trash or throwaway goods, that you're loved by you. It wasn't their fault. Pray for the person who's made mistakes or done things they wish hadn't happened, that they would not be overwhelmed by shame. They wouldn't see themselves as defective from this point out. They'd see themselves as loved by you, by your grace that renews and heals. And that they have all of their tomorrows ahead of them, walking with your Spirit full of grace. Lord, comfort them with that. Lord, I pray for my friends who they need to be sanctified. They need to commit themselves to you. They need to say, God, you can have all of me, not just some of me. And today, I want to give you all of me for the rest of my life. You have all of me. Sanctify me, Lord. Put me on the path to living a holy life. I'm going to need help. I pray for my friends who need that today. So, Lord, thank you for the goodness of your word that takes us to a place on the other side of shame. Thank you. Pray this in your name. All God's people said.
Today, Pastor Scott helped us to see our sexuality as good. From the very beginning, the Bible tells us that God deemed our bodies and sex as very good things. That is such good news for us today. If you need to talk to a pastor or you want to be prayed for, I want to invite you to fill out our Connect card. Filling out this card allows us to get in touch with you and pray for your specific needs. Our staff looks through these cards every week and prays for each and every one of them. You can fill out that card by clicking the link below or here on the screen. We want to partner with you in every way that we can. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.